Hello and welcome to Have a Go Heroes. I always shock Jem when I do it like that. First things first, welcome back to Dungeons and Dragons. An apology, we've both been slightly ill,
Yeah.
so a lot.
So there's been a bit of a gap between videos, but we're back.
Yay! So Jem, what are we going to do today?
Today we are looking at the first bit of the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Dun dun dun! It's old Sararak on the cover, and this guy who is probably Kaz might betray him in a later storyline that won't come up ever in any of your D&D games. Okay, that irrelevant piece of trivia out of the way. We're going to be looking at what's called Part 1, Master of Worlds, and Chapter 1 of that, A World of Your Own. The idea is to give you some ideas of how much of this to take for a campaign and how not to. So Jen's not read her way through it. Instead, she's just going to go through it now and see how much she needs and doesn't need to maybe form some core assumptions of what she's going to create for a campaign world. If that makes sense. So the first thing to bear in mind is what you don't need to do for a campaign is like design everything. Not to begin with. You need to think about the basic tenets that your world exists under and have an idea of maybe where the adventures are going, kind of like an elevator pitch. You don't have to have that ready right now, if that makes sense. So feel free to, as we did with the Player's Handbook, take a look at Chapter 1.
Okay, so your world is the setting for your campaign, the place where the adventures happen. Then it goes on to the big picture.
Okay, the big picture is really important in that D&D operates on certain core assumptions. Things like the world is very old and therefore has lots of dungeons, and the world has magic that works the way D&D magic does. You have to look at each of those and kind of decide, am I keeping that, and how much work would I have to do not to keep? So have a look at those core assumptions and see.
Okay, gods oversee the world. I'm happy to keep that in my game, and I quite like the god angle because gods are literal beings that exist. It's not a belief system in the way that life is a belief system.
There's a whole other video on that.
It's gods are physical beings, you know. So saying that they don't exist is a bit bizarre. Whether you believe in them is irrelevant because they actually are real in D&D. So yeah, I'm going to keep that in my game. Much of the world is untamed. Wild regions abound. City-states, confederacies, kingdoms of various sizes dot the landscape, but beyond their borders, the wilds crowd in. That's exactly the kind of game I like, to be honest. But I always play druids, so.
There you go.
The world is ancient. Yep. What would be the point of making a game in a world that was just born? You know, that would just be so dull.
There's a certain element, like I kind of get the. I'd like a campaign where, like, say you played the heroes of Greek myth, where you're the first generation and you have the power to shape the world.
I mean,
like that.
yeah. I kind of, maybe if your world was new in the way that Shannara is new, that you're playing in a certain world, but there was something before that was really ancient, but that's almost irrelevant, just so happened.
Yeah, I mean, you could stumble across, taking Shannara's example, you could stumble across, in fact, in one of the Shannara books that we played as a campaign before I read it as books, it involves an ancient ruin that is part of the world before, so things like that. I think that's what the world is ancient is about. You know, if you think about Forgotten Realms, it's about those forgotten empires.
So but Shannara would still function as a world without that.
Yeah,
the way that it operates now, it doesn't need that, but it adds so much depth and flavour, and it's beautiful.
But if you're playing in Shannara rather than reading it, maybe dungeons would be important to think about.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Conflict shapes the world's history. Well, that's sort of universal truth, isn't it? I can't.
To some extent.
I can't actually imagine how to picture a world where that doesn't happen, because that's so ingrained in human society and culture and history, and it's very because it's so much a part of our lives as people. It'd be very difficult to take that out.
Yeah, I guess
also,
so,
what would your players do all the time? The entire premise of the game is hinges on conflict.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
personal conflict, hitting monsters. You know, like really, what would they do?
Some of these core assumptions are really more difficult to. I mean, I think there's things for conflict fails to shape the world's history. Like maybe you're just a bunch of adventurers who go on adventures and you don't really change the world.
But what is an adventure without conflict?
Yeah, but that conflict doesn't necessarily have to have a knock-on effect. Say you're telling a story of, say, like some people in a city, and maybe they shape the city, but don't shape the world history.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, a tavern brawl isn't going to have any kind of lasting impact on.
If your entire campaign is tavern brawls and you know it's only going to go to level 5, you don't really have to worry about it.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, I suppose you still.
I think I would like to build a world that was capable of eventually hosting an epic level campaign, and therefore it would need to have overarching conflicts and conflicts of interest, or I don't know, racial conflicts between elves and dwarves, or something similar.
That's a really good way of thinking about when you're thinking
going?
about these core assumptions. You're thinking, I would like to build a world that is possible to run this adventure, and the idea that Jen eventually wants to run a campaign, then she may as well make that world.
Yeah, I mean,
that reaches to.
I don't want to limit myself before I've even started.
Deep questions, and we're on page 9.
Doing good, people. Right, the world is magical. Yeah, but although the thing that I've thought for my particular campaign is that magic is regulated in cities. There's been some kind of event, or I don't really want to say too much because I haven't really decided yet. But also in case people who will be my players eventually watch this video. Something has happened and that has necessitated, or the people in charge believe it necessitates a control of magic in populated areas. Cool. So perhaps it's like, I don't know, maybe different races do it differently. So maybe it's you can only do magic if you are taught, or something like that. Or,
we're going to say she's overthinking it.
I'm overthinking it.
Yeah. It's really good that you've got stuff, and you should definitely do this. Before you even start doing any of the stuff that's in here, what you should try and do is form a campaign palette. And all that is you go away and you write down like 20 things that you think should be in the game or inspire the game. So, for example, I have this idea of a game that's like an Underdark Dwarf game, and I'd write down, say, cyberpunk, because I want there to be like a weird underground neon lit corporation that rule the city that may or may not be Illithids. And then like also I'd write Middle Earth down because I want to put all that dwarven stuff in, and maybe I'd say on my palette list there'd be like fight with a purple worm, because I've always wanted to use a purple worm in a proper setting. And then maybe I might put like songs that inspire me, or novels, just so that I can kind of have that floating around and come back to it when I'm out of ideas, or when I'm building the world. I can just dip into it and think, right, okay, so there's an entire nest of purple worms that live in this area, and maybe we'll base an adventure around that later on, probably about 13th level, because that's a challenge rating. Things like that.
See, this is the thing, I don't know stuff like challenge ratings and off the top of my head.
Don't worry, we'll get to encounter building in a later video. Don't worry, there's nuts and bolts on.
Really
they're not necessarily to build the world, but if you have bits that you want to do, you can at least think about where you want to place them in the world.
Dungeons and Dragons, there has to be at least one dragon
in your dungeon. I think
in your campaign at some point, surely there's got to be.
But then Dark Sun didn't had one dragon in the entire game.
But it had a dragon.
Yeah, it was like 26 levels.
But it had a dragon.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. It had no gods.
At some point, your game must get to a dragon.
Okay, I won't necessarily disagree. There are settings without dragons, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Right, the next it talks about
gods of your world. So you can go with the pantheons that are in the book already, which does save you an awful lot of work.
Or at least based something off them.
or you can change their names and their like exact flavours, but you know.
The reason that gods are on like page 10 is because when you're thinking about your world, it's often useful to think about how it began. Or how religion functions with regards to the societies you're going to create.
Oh right, so do I have a creation myth or?
Yeah, and is worlds that there are lots of different ways of doing it. For example, Faerun has like 15 different pantheons, and you can kind of pick a god from anywhere. Or maybe you've got one god. So you've got that entire setting. That's more difficult.
That would be really hard.
But possible. Or maybe two, one dark, one light.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe one god is... Or there's a pantheon that's worshipped by everybody. Sort of like the Norse gods, where everybody kind of pays homage to all of the gods.
Yeah.
It's just that clerics favour one. If that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess it depends on how many playable races I'm going to have. You know, I think surely, because like if you're just having a game, if your game was all humans, then your pantheon would probably be a lot smaller than if you had like Tabaxi or Dragonborn or other things like more exotic, if you like, races.
Yeah, or if you wanted to just do gods based on concepts.
Yeah, or how big your world is. You know, if it's on an island, a tiny little island,
probably got one god.
It's probably got one god, or at most like a god of the land and a god of the sea, or something like that. You know, like,
yeah, we played a caveman game where like the tribe knew about 4 gods, and they were kind of really just ancestors. And that kind of worked, didn't it? They just,
but if it's like a continent the size of Asia or Europe, then of course it's going to have, a huge number of gods. And I also want to give the players opportunities to kind of come up with their own, not come up with their own gods like necessarily, but say these are the things that my character wants out of a god. What fits? Yeah. And then I can come up with something that fits with my world, and we can kind of work together on it.
I think all of that stuff you need to start talking players a little bit, because you'll design 7 gods, and then someone will come to you and go, I've read Xanathar's Guide and I want to play a Forge cleric, and you're like, I don't have any Forge gods. So you have to kind of then be a bit flexible, especially if you're creating your own world. I think that's a good point. Okay. The next section is mapping. Now, this look of distaste on your face is amazing. Now, the thing about mapping, and it says it here, there's several different scales, as you can see.
Yeah, so province scale, kingdom scale, continent scale, combining scales, I say.
Yes, not different. So, I would always suggest that have an idea of what your continent might look like. But to begin with, you're only going to be running one dungeon. You only really need a village or a settlement of some kind and its surrounding area. Don't overdo it. I think that would be the best way to do it.
Robin Hood only needed Nottingham, didn't he?
Yeah, and there was an entire set of stories. Okay, Robin Hood probably never got beyond 6th level, but like, don't hate me in the comments. But as a result, like, he never really moves outside the province, and that's fine. If you filled that province with orcs and dragons and whatever, then you probably play Fantasy Robin Hood without moving outside of a massive grid map. Do you now want to play Fantasy Robin Hood?
Tiny bit.
But like me, Marion and a Merry Men, where like Tony Robinson is the sheriff. So after that, it's settlements, which when you look at it, it basically gives you like, okay, what's the local colour, what's the home base, and what's the adventure sites.
Oh, so is this like, is this like cities, building?
This is designing a village, a city, a town, whatever.
Okay.
But really, what it breaks that down to is not like individual houses. Is this the place your PCs are going to be? And if so, is there a place for them to settle? Like, is there an inn?
Right, I see.
Or anything? What's the local colour? Like, pick one big thing about that city.
Yeah, because why have they built a town there? You know, everything is built for a reason, like a resource or a trade route or something. They don't. Yeah. It's very unusual for a town to spring up for no reason.
Which is why they put mapping first, because if you build your city, your map, and you suddenly think, well, I'm going to place settlements along the river, right? Because that makes sense.
I think your world feels more real if things have a reason to be there. You know, if you're, there's no point having a fishing village if there aren't any decent fish. you know, or like, you know, or something, you know,
in a desert.
Like what would be the point? Or
I've got to find a way to do that.
How bizarre would that be?
Very cool.
Like just like clinging on to a way of life, and everything's dried up, and just this is going to be great. I'm going to put this in.
Yeah, absolutely. You see, all you're doing there is thinking about economics and how like a real world town would function. Also, you have to think if they're in this area, what are the adventure sites?
Yeah, so so a mining town, you have a quarry and
So, for example, in the campaign I'm running at the moment, or one of the campaigns I'm running at the moment, I came up with an elven settlement called Brightdale, and then instantly went, okay, so what's around it? And knew that somewhere in there was the tomb of a halfling druid, and like there's a few goblins to the north, and just built a few encounters between two settlements to make sure that there was stuff to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because inevitably your players will deviate from whatever the overarching storyline is.
Yeah.
Because
it just happens.
Yeah, it's not a dictatorship, is it? It's a game for fun.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So then you've got, it just breaks things down. Atmosphere, like what type of a place is it when you arrive? Like pick something.
Is it welcoming?
Yeah. So let's build a settlement. Okay.
Okay.
Are we going to build this drowned? This like desert. I know that you're not going to use it to begin with, but
this dried up fishing village.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go through it. The local colour is, you know, like it's just a brief description. Yeah, it's a desolate fishing village. Right?
It'll be people. It'll be like 3rd, 4th, 5th generation fishing people, and their families, and they're kind of clinging on because this is all they've known and this is where they grew up, but. You know, the rivers essentially run dry. It's like a trickle of a stream, and they're all a bit despondent and miserable.
You've also got into atmosphere there, which is great. Go back for a second to home base and kind of think, if the PCs are going to set up base here, maybe even live here and settle down.
Why would they do that?
Well, I don't know. But if you're starting a campaign here.
Okay. Well, if they were going to do that,
what place is there that they could possibly settle down?
Well, there'll be an inn. There'll be a dry dock.
That could be kind of cool, like an abandoned barn that's been turned into like a drop
massive
house.
Barges that are abandoned because the river is not deep enough anymore for them to float.
Oh, I'm getting a feeling of like, you know, in like there's those scrap cities in Africa where they've got like all the disused like metal hulks. Yeah, I'm feeling
that'd be pretty cool actually. So like massive boats that are just kind of empty and hollowed out, and people have built like, you know. It's like a shanty town out of dead boats, really.
Okay. Adventure sites nearby.
Okay, well there's going to be... So further down the stream there's probably like a bit more water. So some kind of like boggy, swampy area. But also there'll be like a deserty bit further up. But that's just the physical landscape. Do you mean creatures?
Yeah, exactly. What you need to look at is not just the physical landscape. I mean, it's good to do, but also think, where can we go on an adventure? For example, if you've got a wet place, why isn't the water coming back from that wet place? Has it been dammed? Is that by orcs?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay,
you see?
Okay, well maybe more like orcs.
Yeah, orcs are really standard.
Orcs are very done, aren't they?
Yeah, a little bit.
I don't know.
We'll talk about monsters for another day, but like, for example, if you're going to pick a desert setting, maybe you go and have a look at what has a desert environment. Maybe you pick gnolls, for example,
something like that.
You know, lizard folk.
Cactus people.
I like cactus people. Cactus people is a cool idea.
Is that in the book?
No, but there is a dragon. There's a few interesting cactus people. I like the cactus ents from the desert book.
Oh wow, that'd be amazing.
So
probably a bit beyond first level.
Yeah. Government. Then you have to think, who rules the city?
Probably the Guild of Fishermen.
Okay,
who
so
have
it's
nothing else to do now that there's no fish.
It's a terrible place.
It's an awful place.
Yeah.
I'm not normally a miserable person. I'm sorry, everybody.
So, just define that. You know, like it's a meritocracy, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I guess it would be.
Or unless you're thinking about who's the richest fools, I guess.
Well, I suppose at this point, it probably was originally a meritocracy, but at this point, you can't prove yourself as a fisherman when there's no fish. So it's probably like the old guys who originally were quite good at this, but actually they're just clinging on because nobody else is going to take their place in such a miserable place, and they wouldn't allow them to because what else have they got?
So gerontocracy, I think it is.
I don't know.
That just means old people rule.
Okay.
So like the village elders and that.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's a good thing. There's probably like a few that are like well-meaning, and then a few that are like out for themselves.
Cool. So see, all you're doing is answering the questions in the DMG, and we already kind of built a really interesting place.
Yeah, it's a bit odd, isn't it?
So commerce and currency. We're talking about small village. We'll probably just think about what they've got left, and what we're hearing is they have no commerce.
Yeah.
And that's already an interesting adventure point, because like, could the heroes at some point get the river to flow again?
Yeah.
You know,
what
like,
would that do to their entire society?
Yeah. So you're already, your first 5 adventures are kind of by themselves.
Yeah, I suppose.
And then like currency. It's talking about how currency works. Now in the DMG, it gives an example of the Forgotten Realms currency. Unless you are a martyr, just take that. Because like, once you start messing with currency in the game, you have to remember that you're doing it and teach it to players and things like that. So unless you really want to do it, don't do it.
Most of the time, we very rarely go. We just do everything in gold, don't we? Like, I don't often.
I don't. I'm a real stickler for those smaller. Yeah.
I'm sure when I was a kid, I guess they made it easier for us by just doing everything was just gold. There was no like silvers and coppers.
I love giving people like 10,000 copper pieces in a casket.
Oh, I can see that being
like,
annoying.
And being like, get that out of the dungeon. Go on, try.
Yeah, and it's worth like nothing, isn't it? Really.
I would. I mean, the thing I do is that the DMG suggests the Electrum piece, which is standard across 5th Ed. But it didn't used to exist, so I just cut it out.
What is it?
Brain.
Like
it's like a half gold.
Oh, so
it's like 5 silver.
Oh, I don't like that.
Yeah, it's ugly, isn't it? Anyway,
yeah.
But it's your choice. If you just
is that a kind of metal?
Yes.
Is it a real one?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I like it. I don't like it. Right.
Okay, fair enough. Back to the world again. You've got languages and dialects.
Okay. Well, I'm going with standard playable races in the book, and at the moment you can pick any of them because I haven't decided otherwise. So therefore, all of their languages can be chosen.
Yeah. Like I say, sometimes there are regional differences in language. You do that with accent, but if you decide to do that later on down the line, it's just something to think about. And next,
I'm not, as a person, very good at doing accents. Especially if somebody else is doing an accent in the group. If we had someone doing an amazing Scottish accent, I could not do an Irish accent at the same time. When I'm listening to that, I would find it really difficult to stay because I don't know it well enough. So I think I might do, odd bits.
Your ability to do an accent has nothing to do with your ability.
I guess I can say, and he says in a burly Scottish accent.
Yeah, absolutely. People will imagine that.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to deliver an accent to be judged a good DM. There are plenty of great DMs who just deliver it in their own voice. It is a skill you can develop.
Yeah, I'd like to get better at it. But I'm under no illusions that I'm terrible.
Just in the first adventure, don't introduce anyone with an accent.
Yeah,
and then see how it goes.
Yeah.
Factions and organisations. Now, I have a particular bugbear about factions and organisations as presented in the DMG. Do share. They're not really anything. A faction is a thing that adds some colour to the world, and you can add renown, but you kind of, as a DM, are left to make up what the benefits of collecting those renown points are. So, for example, you can join the Harpers, who are a bunch of, in Faerun, like bards who have like a secret kind, not very secret mission to kind of improve the standing of everyone and keep free people free. They have other things going on, but that's basically it. Now, you can collect renown points by doing things for them, or like going on adventures and eventually gain rank, but it doesn't mechanically mean anything unless you, as a dungeon master, set out a guide for yourself, and you have to do that work. So sometimes it's better to just be like, well, they belong to a society, they don't, and then work out that bonus.
See, all I would say is if I was going to do something like the Harpers, it would be, you're a member of the Harpers. Occasionally this means you have obligations, but it also means if you meet another Harper, they are likely to help you out on a mission.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever. I wouldn't do it so it has any mechanical basis on purpose.
I guess that's what they want you to do here, but like, then why bother with renown points?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
They don't need points. It's like that's midichlorians, isn't it? That's just no.
I mean, to be fair, like if you're about to run Waterdeep Dragon Heist, that has a really good breakdown of actually here's what each renown point might get you from this faction.
Okay.
Here are missions you can go on at that level, but
for the kind of thing we're doing,
it's not worth deciding right away.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is think of a few factions your players could join. So that maybe resemble some of these factions, because then you can use stuff from other materials straight away. So for example, you need a faction who are like a load of knights. You need a faction who are interested in magic and nature and intelligence. You might need a faction that are maybe not so nice, like a thieves guild. That's always useful to have around.
Yeah.
So it's just about thinking about organisations that might have a foothold in the place that the players are.
Yeah.
So for example, you talked about maybe there are two separate factions in the sort of rule of the fishing villages. You know, you said there were the older people who might be making bad decisions. And you've got to assume there's a younger generation.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
The upstarts.
And is that conflict? You know.
Yeah.
Now, magic in your world. Okay, it's restrictions on magic.
Oh, it's a whole section.
Yeah. See.
Ooh, it's not very big.
It's not, but that's okay. The fact that it's in the DMG shows you that you can do it without too much problem. If you think of something really insane, like I'm going to completely reinvent magic, and you have to talk to an animal every day at dawn and persuade it to do things, that's a kind of other system
that
the DMG knows that the game can't cope with.
That wouldn't work, because your magic players with magic capabilities would be massively underpowered then compared to your martial characters.
Yeah. When you think about balance,
it'd be totally unreasonable.
You'd have to rescale.
Yeah, all of my ideas about restriction of magic is like story based. Like the characters are capable of exactly as much as their level dictates they are capable of. It's whether they're allowed to do it societally, you know, like in public.
And it kind of dictates NPC reactions.
Yes, things like that as reactions. But I'm also intending that it's only the cities that people actually care. Maybe not care, but like, police this. In the wild, you can do whatever you like because no one's watching anyway.
Okay, cool.
So.
Other assumptions: schools of magic exist. Now you have to think about how much of an impact they have on your game. So like they're in your society, I guess they're just favoured types of magic. Like
what do you
if
mean
you're so if you are an evocation specialist,
it's right.
And you're good at fireballs. In some settings, that means you have trained under a long lineage of evocationists.
Right, okay.
In other settings, it just means this is where your talent lies, and you have to decide kind of how magic is organised culturally. If it's oppressed, I imagine there's no lineages or legacies of magic.
No, I don't think there would be. Well,
which affects how spells work.
There probably are like ancient texts about how the way things used to be.
Okay, so you've already got secrets that you can kind of embed in the game.
Oh yeah, they've got the secrets.
Yeah, absolutely. The one rule I would say is when you create, say, a settlement or an area, is think of at least 2 or 3 secrets that you can just bung in there that the players can uncover, because discovery is a real massive part of the game. So when you're designing something, always think, like in the campaign world, in the origin of the world, add a secret. When you're building a settlement, add a secret. When you're changing something about the game like this, add a secret. Why was magic oppressed? Do we know? Or is it just cultural? Yeah, exactly. See?
This is fun.
Yeah, pretty good. Some magic spells also contain other ideas that you might want to think about, like these are societies that in theory can bring back the dead. If high necromancy or like divine magic is commonplace, then death has a different meaning. A lot of settings say, well, actually, most clerics tap out before they can bring someone back to life. You can be a priest your entire life and not gain those spells. You have to be a figure of legend. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Again, for you, I suppose magic's so not commonplace now that you don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
Yeah, but then I guess that would be problematic if one of my PCs dies.
Yeah,
But
as in
there's nothing we can do, and that might affect like things like, I don't know, the challenge rating things, maybe.
Or you can think
that, I don't want death to not be on the table.
Or you can think backwards. I mean, if you take that idea and then move it backwards, so that like you look at factions again and think, are there a faction of secret resurrectionists?
Oh yeah, okay.
You know, that sort of thing. You need to think backwards and forwards when you're going through this. Don't rewind the video. That's not the way to go. Next section. This is the section we should have started with, maybe.
Creating a campaign. Oh yeah, maybe.
Maybe. I mean, you've got a world now.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. So we've kind of done a lot of this. Start small. Start building your campaign. Start small. The characters only need to know about the city, town, village, where they start the game, or perhaps a nearby dungeon.
Yeah.
Well, that's fairly obvious, isn't it? And actually, some of the things they might talk about, or that come up from their backstory, would probably create half the world for me. I don't need to do anything. Always
when you're designing a world, leave blank space. Because someone will want to come from a very specific society, village type of thing, and you'll have to somehow fit that in or compromise on it in some way. It's better if you just go, yeah, I'll find a way to make that work, rather than like get into it like, no, in my world there are no cities that have waterfalls on them, so you did not have a battle over a waterfall. Because that's, it's just oppressive. There's no reason for it.
That ruins their fun, doesn't it?
I mean, if you look at the really well accepted and long-running games, with the exception of Dark Sun, there's a lot of room for people to fit their own differing character backgrounds in.
Yeah.
Things like Forgotten Realms and Eberron. They really let you just create.
Which is what you want. So yeah, create a home base. Well, I don't know if we're going to use this fishing village as home base, but I don't see why not. Local region. Craft a starting adventure. So it suggests a simple dungeon. I guess that would be like a 5-room dungeon type
let's talk about 5-room dungeon, because it's not something... This is something that was pioneered at the end of 3rd Ed as an idea in Dragon Magazine. The 5-room dungeon. It's very simple. You make a dungeon that has 5 rooms in it. And that's usually enough to play through in a session and a half, depending on how long your session is. But it gives the players enough of a bite that they get a feel. Dungeon feels kind of thingy. It's like something. And you can add enough encounters or traps into it that it's not too much of a headache to remember what every room is. You don't really want to dive into a 70-room mega dungeon on your first adventure.
It would take forever. And it'd be quite dull.
Well, there are tricks, but that's a later video. A lot later video. But yeah.
No, I don't think... I'd rather... Early on, I think I want to spend more time letting the players get to know their characters than I do dungeon crawling.
Okay. You can do that in a dungeon.
Yeah, but not for 6 sessions in a row.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. Campaign events.
Okay, significant events in the history of a fantasy world tend towards immense upheavals. Well, that's true, isn't it? Like every big fantasy story out there, there's something enormous that happened.
Yeah.
Or several enormous things.
So this section in the DMG is massive, and it's usable in several different ways. The first thing is, if you don't have any ideas, you can kind of roll on these tables, but also you can use it to create a history of a world if you don't have enough ideas. So it's things like world-shaking events that happened, like was there a cataclysmic disaster? And you can roll on a series of tables that say, oh, there was an invasion 30 years ago, or maybe there was some kind of prophecy. But you need to think around now, like, where are your beats in your campaign? Again, using the example of the campaign I had before, without spoiling anything for my players, I knew that beat 1 was all the characters meet on a certain day, and there is an invasion of the village, and that's the first adventure. And then I know later on that another beat is they go to the north and they discover what's going on. And then another beat is they return but things have changed. And then the next beat is I'm not going to tell you because they're still playing through it. But, slowly you have to think about revealing your plot and where those beats are going to land, sort of. But feel free to be able to shift those goalposts. Maybe think about, like, where would you go if the players don't bite on this? Have you got another idea ready?
But how do you not give it all away at the beginning? Like let's say I've decided what the big bad at the end is.
Are we talking like level 20? Let's assume it's 20.
Okay, you know, like what is going on? I know exactly why everything is as it is, or you know what went wrong with magic and why it's all like this, or whatever it is.
I would suggest your first adventure has very little to do with that.
Yeah. So at what point is it like kind of 5th to 10th you start hinting at it?
So,
or is it like, you know, how do you decide when to feed them these little bits without them finding out everything at the beginning?
Well, firstly, by not telling them. Like, you completely control the information in a game until someone plays a diviner. But, like,
it's always fun.
If you don't even have to have that stuff pinned down necessarily, as long as you have a vague idea. But, like, you have tiers of play, and those tiers of play are, like, local heroes, kind of world hero, like continent heroes, world heroes, planar heroes, you know, like actually there are levels of where, but
epicness.
Part of it you should reward good play. Like if players pick up on a plot thread, you should pull it forward, and maybe it turns out that what you decided was the big bad is in fact somebody else.
Yeah.
But really, you shouldn't be mentioning your big bad in the first 3 or 4 adventures.
No.
Maybe
not by name.
And I think a lot of DMs make the mistake of like featuring a villain really early on who is nails, and what will happen is the 3rd time they show up, they kind of start to lose a bit of that threat, and the players start to work out how to beat them, and maybe they'll kill them. So you have to be really kind of careful about those big villains and those big reveals, and you just have to, on one level, you have to sit on them.
Yeah, it's like Jaws, isn't it? Jaws was scary because you didn't see the shark a lot.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, another thing about campaign design is that what you should probably do is decide those first 3 adventures, have the big bad right out here somewhere, and then in the middle you have the actions of the players in the campaign and their backstories. Right? So what you can do is set up a load of stuff in the early sections, which are like, you know, like the players anger someone, or the players accept a deal they probably shouldn't have, or the players like kill somebody they shouldn't have, and that snowballs, so that when you're dealing with those middle levels, sometimes it's just the stuff that the players have set off themselves, or the webs they've got to get through to get higher up, or characters from their backstory who aren't very nice, you know, and actually that's really rewarding stuff for the players. And if you can then tie that in to the villains later on, you've kind of got this. Then you've got this through track. You know.
Well, okay, but then also, what if you don't have like a singular big bad? What if the thing is like finding out the big secret at the end rather than a villain? You know, then how do you?
There's a couple of.
That's hard, isn't it?
Hard. Yeah. I bet she set herself up for something really hard that I don't know.
I don't know if I have yet. But, you know, can that still work? Is that going to be a satisfying end if there's not some kind of
big combat? Yeah, I think so. But you have to prepare for that. You have to prepare the players for it as the campaign goes on. Like we did a game where we began to slowly realise, the DM set us up, that this story was going to be a tragedy by the end. And I think some of us weren't prepared for it, and were kind of sad. But I kind of enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fact that we went away from the tale with a like sort of bitter taste in the mouth, and some characters just went into the north and were never heard of again.
So there was a kind of inevitability about it.
Yeah, it was a bit Lord of the Rings, you know, like you know, we're going to go to the Grey Havens, and like this is, you know, an analogy for death, you know, and that was kind of cool. But yes, we're getting a bit off track, but this is interesting for campaign events, because you have to think about these things. You have to think about, okay, what events are we going to have in the backstory of the world, and how will the players discover these things? Where are they hidden? And that's or are they common knowledge? You know, Eberron, like, it's set like a certain number of years, I think 10 or 12 years after a massive war, maybe even less, maybe even 5 years, I can't remember now, but like, that impacts everything in the setting then.
Yeah.
So you have to think about what happened in the past impacting your starting thing, because that's what you have to present to the players to begin with.
And I suppose also, the further back something is, the more that NPCs will tell them their version or their understanding of the truth of it, which won't always be the truth of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So while they think they might be getting all the information and that kind of keeps them hooked, they're not necessarily getting what they think they are.
Yeah, especially if that NPC thinks they know the truth. Yeah, it can be quite misleading. Now we're going to very quickly go through tracking time. Tracking time talks about things like you need to track how long your campaign's taking, because if you put seasons in and things like that, it gives this real world verisimilitude. That word. Verisimilitude. That's the one.
You mean like time as in
how much time
weeks,
has passed?
months?
Yeah. Or how much food
days.
are they using? 10 days. How much food are they using? Like, have they come into a religious festival as the town?
Yeah, and if they come back to the town the next year, the festival will be.
Has anything moved on? Like, what's the weather like? Like, how is this town in winter compared to this town in summer?
I feel like as a player, I've not put a lot of stock into that before, probably because we've just got on with it. But I think
a lot of the D&D games have been travelogues.
But I also think if it hadn't have been there, it would have lacked something. And you don't even realise until it's not there. The idea that your characters don't sit down around a campfire and have to eat every day if they can, things like that. It becomes. I think if you take away that element of realness, when there's so much fantasy and magic and chaos, then it's not the game that it could be. It's not as full a game. And experience.
Yeah. So think about that. Think about events that maybe make the world more real.
And that's more important as a DM, isn't it? Because that's not the thing that the player will take away from the session. Is we all sat down and we had our rations and that was there was a battle, but the rations
and we we rock up in this village and they're celebrating Halloween or whatever, or like or maybe every third Sunday, this village, there's a blood-curdling cry in the woods, and we don't know why.
But if it hadn't have been there, if I hadn't have put that in as a DM, I think you need those kind of downbeats almost to the normalness to make the impact of the big stuff more impactful, more exciting.
Well, it makes the NPCs more real as well, because they have a life outside of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like that when that in games and stories.
Time passes.
When they do sort of strange, like maybe they get married or something, like while you've been away, and it's like and it's just such a random extra fact that the DM just throws in for apparently no reason, but it's just it gives it more of a I don't know, just a little something.
So track time. Work out how much time has passed. If the players go back to
kids
a place,
grow up,
change something.
If people have, if NPCs have children, or even if PCs have children, those kids aren't gonna stay kids, Things like that.
Now the last bit, ending a campaign. You briefly talked about this before.
Yeah, I've never. I've played for so long. I've never been in a campaign that ended on purpose. If I've been in campaigns.
Masterminds.
I have been. I've been in one campaign that ended on purpose. But most things I've played, we've played for ages and ages, and then scheduling happened, and it's just been left unfinished.
Don't worry about that. If your game ends because it kind of peters out, you're probably in about the same bracket as about 75% of games. The important thing is to recognise that, and then find a great end. Don't let it peter out. Instead, think, okay, I'm not going to be able to have them face Asmodeus, the archdevil. Instead go, well, okay, but they're fighting these minions at the moment, and maybe they can stop the plot here. All they have to do is defeat the most recent nemesis.
Have some kind of satisfying end if you can. But I don't mind the fact that things have been left, because there is a chance that those games will pick up again.
Or the next campaign runs in the same world with the same problems, or the next generation.
So it's not, not. But because I've not really played endings as a player. I have no idea how to end a campaign.
Don't worry, sticking the landing
this is a long way in advance,
really difficult.
So maybe I don't need to think about it now.
To worry about it.
I don't need to worry about it.
You need to have an idea, like, for example, say it was a secret. I was thinking about this while you've been thinking about it. Is if it was a secret, and you uncover that secret, say like why magic died. Well, if you're given a chance to fix that somehow, then maybe that would be a good ending. Like it wouldn't matter that you hadn't ended on a big combat. That makes sense. It's possible to do it without that adrenaline high.
I'm sure it would probably come in. But,
there are loads and loads of games that like end on really interesting notes that have nothing to do with like resolution. One of the ones I'd suggest is if you see Critical Role, there's a load of stuff run by Liam that has very different goals. But I don't want to spoil or anything, but it goes a different way.
So do you do like epilogues almost? So the big thing happens and then you think, oh, what happened to the PTs after that? Always give your characters a chance to... and a shout out to Lowell Francis for this, from the Gauntlet, because amazing, he recently wrote an article about epilogues, and the idea that you should give players a chance to just write what happens next and just let that land. He talked about it in conventions because like you only get to play those characters for like an hour or two and then you feel sad they don't get to do anything. So always let them write that. But also like, I think it's important that agency that you've given them throughout the campaign continues and that they are allowed to add some bits at the end, unless they're dead. In which case, because when you get to an ending, you should remove the kid gloves. I feel like that's when you can afford to kill a character or two and still have everyone finish the game feeling like they had fun because you went out swinging at the end. I've had a character die in the last combat and it was beautiful. It was epic,
Like, he died
heroically,
taking the place of someone else who was going to die, and that was kind of cool.
I think it's important to remember that while you are the DM, your players, especially if it becomes an epic level campaign, that this is your player's story as much, if not more. It's probably way more the player's story. It's so of course they're going to want to have a say in shaping your world and their impact on it and how
finishing the story
and how their story ends. It's their story.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can, loads of things can happen in the aftermath. Like, we've decided in a campaign that two characters got married after the game finished. And there were characters that didn't really like each other during the campaign, but it was just inevitable that that's where they'd end up. We just didn't feel like we could roleplay them into that situation, but we knew it would happen.
I think that's the thing I'm taking away from this. I'm becoming less and less nervous about doing this the more videos we do in general, but the main thing is that I need to worry a lot less about it because I can give the players more agency and that takes the stress off of me. Like there's some things I have to do mechanically and there's some things I have to do story-wise and I have to present these situations, but ultimately the players will write the story. All I'm doing is facilitating their story writing in a way.
In many ways,
So I need to just let it happen, and stop trying to know it all before it's even started.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. If you take nothing else away from the videos, that.
When I'm getting to the end.
We're not near the end yet. We're okay. I'm joking. This is something. The next bit is play style, and that's something you have to kind of decide once you know the group a little bit. So you've got it presents two poles. There's immersive storytelling, which is like. You narrate, you're all about the characters and their story and how that narrates, and then there's hack and slash, which is like lots of grid combat, lots of loot, and the truth is then it gives up to something in between.
You want a balance, and the likelihood is you're going to have some players who are on one end of that spectrum and some are on the other. So of course you want to have a fairly balanced campaign.
Exactly. Then we get to sort of continuing our episodic campaign. The way to look at that is a continuing campaign is Game of Thrones. An episodic campaign is Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
You don't see many episodic D&D games.
No, that'd be
the format's a little. But I mean, you can. It can be just a series of adventures that you go through for lols.
Some people
you don't have to have this overarching epic story.
Yeah, some people do we'll do like a level 1 campaign, and then a few months happen, and we'll come back to it as a level 4 campaign.
Well, we don't necessarily have to fill in the downtime.
Especially if your group is one where maybe you live all over the country and you only get together now and again.
Yeah, or Adventurers League. You can go and play the start of Tomb of Annihilation. Then maybe you don't finish it, but you've got a 6th level character, and then you'll bung them into, say, Curse of Strahd. I know I did that backwards, but whatever.
Yeah.
Also, you don't have to play them when the season's played. But yes,
there's a place for it. It's not the game I'm going to be running, probably, but there is a place for episodic gaming.
So the next bit is flavours of fantasy. That's really interesting to me because I'm a real big fan of genres. I've written quite a lot on genres and role-playing games. There's a column that I do, we'll talk about at the end, just if you want to get more of an idea of this. But essentially, fantasy is not one genre. When you think about Conan the Barbarian, Lord of the Rings, something like Game of Thrones, they all feel very different. And this section gives you a good guide as to how and what those sort of subgenres have in them. So there's a very different between heroic fantasy and sword and sorcery. Let me just read the baseline assumptions from these, and you can kind of get an idea of where it's different. So heroic fantasy, it says something like, adventurers bring magic powers to bear against monsters they face. They typically come from ordinary backgrounds, but something impels them into an adventuring life. They might not be truly heroic, instead pursuing this life for selfish reasons. Technology and society are based on medieval norms, but the culture isn't necessarily European. In Sword and Sorcery, it starts with, a grim, hulking fighter disembowels a high priest of a serpent god on his own altar. A laughing rogue spends ill-gotten gains on cheap wine in filthy taverns. It's a much more gritty sort of disseparate world. And then when you talk about epic fantasy, it says, a devout paladin in gleaming plate armour braces his lance as he charges a dragon. Bidding farewell to his dear love, a noble wizard sets forth on a quest to close a gate in the 9 hells that is operated in a remote wilderness. It's very different feels, those three, I feel. And they're just some of the selections. You've also got mythic fantasy, so we're talking about like the Norse sagas or the Greek sagas, or like dark fantasy, swashbuckling, mystery, war. It's even got wuxia in here, which is, like sort of Eastern. Asian fantasy, with sort of swap your paladins for samurais.
Yeah, Eastern flavour, isn't it?
So there's lots of different streams to choose from, and each of those ideas, if you want to take one, comes with its own genre tropes that you would do well to research. These are great tasters in here, but you can do more. The column that I write is on a website called Geek Native, and it's called Genre Police. And if you really want to get into like mixing genres or adding stuff, I still want to do my cyberpunk dwarf setting. It just gives you ideas of what tropes to use and how to bring them into D&D, if that makes sense, or any other role-playing game.
Yeah, we'll put a link for you guys to find.
To one of the more recent ones.
So that you're and they should all be there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so also you are running a campaign, so you need to have a think about these.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna sit and read through these and probably read through that column actually.
Yeah.
And have a think for the next video what kind of flavour I want to go for. Mm-hmm. So I mean, would you sort of, so if let's say I had like a whole continent like the size of, I don't know, North America, or maybe North and South America, would you have like, let's say, a high fantasy flavour in the north and then more of a like sword and sorcery in the south, and as your players
I think
descend, or
that's a really interesting idea.
Would that be
quite jarring, I think.
Yeah, do
you
think
have to
that would
set
be
that
difficult?
expectation.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know. I mean, I've never really thought about it in a lot of depth.
It's easy to kind of dip in and out. I would say, like for an adventure, maybe you go and do like a western for like 3 weeks or whatever in one town or whatever. But I think you have to also pick an overall flavour.
Yeah.
And if that flavour is heroic fantasy, I think you have a lot of leeway then, because that's the most generic. So then you can say, add different bits in from different cultures, and you can have like a jungle realm that's full of like Indiana Jones tropes that's really based on pulp adventure. But then if you start to kind of combine things, you can end up feeling like you haven't really got a genre.
Yeah, and that's difficult.
If you were going to bung like Game of Thrones, Conan, and like Middle Earth into your inspiration machine, as it were. Inspiration machine is a great word. What happens then? What makes it unique?
Yeah.
Or is it just D&D?
Yeah.
You know.
That's true. Yeah, because I suppose it's not like while things like Lord of the Rings, you kind of have this picture of New Zealand, don't you? But now, and it's and that kind of landscape lends itself to that kind of fantasy. So you don't really picture. I guess like if they were on a beach for one scene, doing the same style of fantasy, like that would actually fit. But it's not what I picture because that's not what happens in that story. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
But actually, things like Game of Thrones, the stuff that happens on the other continent with Daenerys in the deserts, and the stuff that happens with the Starks in the frozen north, has the same feeling about it, doesn't it? It's got the same level of grit
also
and the same level of
it's also
violence.
about consequence, like and how those trips, like Game of Thrones, the grimdark genre, it plays with subverting those fantasy elements. So like the idea is that your decisions have ridiculous consequence, whereas you might be able to get away with insulting the region in heroic fantasy, and in mythic fantasy, insulting the region will probably lead to some kind of divine balance between being upset. Or epic fantasy, it might be a conflict where you and the region eventually meet on the field of battle. In a grimdark universe, you're probably going to get stabbed in an alley the next day.
Yeah. And that would happen with the world over in Game of Thrones, and you feel like it would.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Actually,
Daenerys is dealing with like a completely different, almost like genre to some of the Westerosi guys, right? She's like in this like almost like sword and sorcery Conan barbarian paradise, like horse lords and Eastern, and there's all that Eastern flavour, but it's still a grimdark universe.
Yeah, and it plays by those rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I didn't really think about this before I posed the question, but actually I like how it feels like it marries up. And it makes you feel like when she does go across the sea like that, she would be prepared to be in that kind of world because she's already in that world. Yeah. So I think that's important actually, that people can go back and forth and
feel like their behaviour has consistency.
I think your PCs need consistency about what to expect to a point.
I mean, if you
not saying
outline
don't surprise them, but
one of the cities is vicious and backbiting, it's a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. If someone's going to bite their thumb at you and somebody else is going to stab you in the same night for the same infraction, and they don't know what to, that's very difficult to.
I desperately want to run a game that is based entirely in Shakespeare's like world. Like you can go to Prospero's Island and like meet Macbeth and but you know what I mean? Like it's got those like elements of like you can travel and like pick a side in Fair Verona and things like that. I think it'd be quite cool.
That'd be quite cool actually.
I might write that down somewhere.
Everything has to be an iambic pentameter.
Yeah. Oh, you get rewarded for that.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be cool.
Inspiration is only given if you deliver a speech in iambic.
Wow, that'd be amazing.
I'm not going to do it now.
We should do that. Let's do that. Screw this D&D rubbish. Let's do it.
Iambics and isolation.
Right. No. We'll work on it.
We'll work on it. Yeah. Swords and Shakespeare.
No, it's probably copyrighted or something. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. We'll think of it. That's kind of the end of chapter 1. That's as far as we want to go because this video is already massive.
Extreme. We're really just chatty people. I'm sorry. But I think it's interesting. Like it's nice to share our thought processes because I'm purposefully not reading this stuff in advance so that we can talk about it fresh for you, with you, and it's just as we come across it, and I think that's. And
it shows how we build, like that settlement we built is a really good example of like how all you do is follow a little bit of a process and it kind of comes alive.
Yeah, and it worked, didn't it?
Yeah. If you don't use it,
I can picture it in my head. Can you not? Can you picture it? That's what you want, isn't it? You want to build it and colour it in, and it feels like somewhere that could exist.
Yeah, and you're building a world.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Just start small, people.
Yeah, don't get overwhelmed. Just build village by village.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
All right.
We'll see you next time.
Word to our sponsors.
Word to our sponsors. Do you want to do that? Because no, you don't want to do that because you don't know any of our sponsors, do you? Oh dear. Okay.
Word to our sponsors.
Word to our sponsors. So our sponsors include Creative Quest, who currently do a great line in inspiration tokens. Yeah. Cool character sheet thingies that are small booklets that when you open them they've got a massive information you can write inside. They're pretty cool. You can find a link on a couple of our videos, especially the live play ones. We're always linking those. You'll have to go to one to find out because A, I don't have the information to link at the bottom, but B, also because I'd like those views to go up and I'm mean. Secondly, there is D20 Heroes, who they do very cool t-shirts which we're still looking into getting. We really want to get some, but our funding is really low at the moment. But the great thing about it, even with low funding, you can get 10% off if you enter Hag Heroes on their website, so that's good. And also we're funded. We're not funded, but we are sponsored by Cryptology, who provide our space for live streams. They're a great escape room based in Nottingham and Sheffield and Barnsley at the moment, so feel free to go and visit those and do your own kind of dungeon. And finally Chimera, who are a great local shop in Nottingham in merry old England, just in case we have any people across the pond watching, or anyone who isn't my mom watching. Hello. She probably don't watch this. So feel free to go to Chimera and play your heart out. They do some really good campaigns. The guy who runs the stuff there, Andy, has an organisation called Twisted Narrative, where you can kind of join campaigns all set in the same world but with very different flavours. And that's really cool.
Some really awesome stuff.
It's a great experiment in world building, that is. Cool. Okay. We hope to see you soon and have fun.
Take
Bye.
Care. Bye.